Archaeologists have, to their surprise, uncovered the remains of a large henge monument close to a medieval abbey in Lincolnshire, England. Not only this, but there's evidence that the site was reused and embellished with a timber circle in the Middle Bronze Age, possibly as part of a ritual complex including barrows. As I've mentioned in several videos recently, the reuse of ceremonial or funerary sites is not uncommon and at many locations has happened repeatedly over hundreds or thousands of years. A new paper published in the Journal Field Archaeology outlines these recent excavations at Crowland Abbey and discusses some other interesting finds that were unearthed there. The site of Crowland Abbey has several ecclesiastical traditions associated with it, which date back to before the Abbey's foundation. It's within these stories that the possibility of a prehistoric landscape first emerged. So for context, let's discuss these traditions. According to the biography of Saint Gulthlac of Crowland, written by a man called Felix in the 8th century, Gulthlac was born in 673, the son of a nobleman, and fought in the army of King Ethelred of Mercia. However, he gave up his military life to become a monk at Repton Monastery in Derbyshire. After 2 years, he wanted to have a more austere lifestyle than that provided by the monastery, so he moved to a sort of island amongst the watery fenlands of eastern England that was called Croyland at the time. Today, this area is called Crowland and is in the county of Lincolnshire. There, Gulthlac became a hermit and, according to his biographer, fought many spiritual battles. The context of the text is, in many ways, very similar to other hagiographies, so experts don't generally try to extract exact historic details and facts from such documents. However, in this particular text, the writer Felix says that Gulthlac made his hermitage in the side of a mound of clods built of earth that had been broken into previously by greedy comers to the waste. These references have intrigued scholars over the years who think it sounds like the description of a robbed-out prehistoric barrow. When Gulthlac was dying, he asked for his sister Pega, an abbess, to travel to Crowland and perform his funeral rites. 12 months later, when she went to move his body, she found it uncorrupted. A small monastic community then sprung up around the cult of Gulthlac and eventually prompted the establishment of Crowland Abbey, the remains of which still stand today. For a long time, experts thought that the robbed-out barrow, if real, could probably be found in Anchor Church Field, 1 kilometre northeast of the Abbey. A strong local tradition connects this particular field to Gulthlac and his sister Saint Pega, and furthermore, various antiquarian writings and drawings feature a mound there. From the 17th century onwards, many attempts were made to drain the low-lying marshy fenland in eastern England. With the introduction of the steam engine, these efforts became more successful. So although the Crowland site is no longer surrounded by water, prior to the reclamation of the fens, it was a peninsula surrounded on 2 sides by rivers and on 1 side by marshland. Its gravel isthmus was so narrow that it was normally accessed via boat, so for all intents and purposes Crowland was an island, and that was how it was often described. Anchor Church Field is located on a slightly higher part of the land than the Abbey, and is on the easternmost part of the former peninsula close to where the waters would have been. It's thought the name Anchor derives from anchorite, another name for a hermit. In the early 18th century, the antiquarian William Stukeley mentioned that there was a small stone cottage in this field which contained a chapel built over the hermitage of Saint Gulthlac. He wrote that it was situated on a mound, and this is evident from a drawing he made of it. In 1965, the same area was mentioned in a Lincolnshire Historic Environment record as being a slight unsurveyable mound. Other tumuli have also been mentioned over the years, with one of several in a line supposedly having been destroyed by antiquarians in the 1880s. It's also possible that part of the place name may derive from the British word for hill, mound, or barrow. Up until recently, a thorough excavation had not been carried out at the site, but surveys and trenching had revealed multi-period occupations going back as far as the late prehistoric. Two intensive excavations took place in Anchor Church Field in 2021 and 2022, and it is these investigations that are outlined in the paper. A 10 by 3 metre evaluation trench had been dug in the past over a feature that could be seen on aerial photography and satellite imagery. This was thought to be a ring ditch, such a feature often being associated with the remains of a Bronze Age barrow. However, the latest investigations revealed a large henge measuring 75 metres in diameter with a 5 metre wide ditch. A post hole surrounded by packing clay was found cut into the ditch 80 centimetres from its western edge. The hole contains small fragments of waterlogged wood which were dated to between 1502 and 1323 BCE, so the Middle Bronze Age. The researchers interpreted these fragments as being the remains of a wooden post which had decayed in situ and which represents the final phase of activity in that particular trench. This means that the henge is an earlier feature, most likely dating to either the Neolithic or early Bronze Age. It also means it's likely that a timber circle was then added to the site at a later date. Henges are not common in the fens, but the remains of those that have been found show that they were a lot smaller than the one at Crowland. The authors of the paper think that Crowland's location between two rivers and a section of marshland may have been the reason a henge was built there. Many henges in Britain and Ireland were surrounded by water, and it's possible that the ditch flooded every winter, creating a sacred island in its centre. Other henges, such as Millfield Basin in Northumberland, have entrances oriented in the same direction as the surrounding river flows. It's possible this was the case at Crowland. However, further investigation of the site is required since no definite entrances have been found. A break in the northern part of the henge may have been an entrance, but it's not certain. A previous geophysical survey carried out by English Heritage in 2002 had identified a definite ring ditch which is to the west of the newly found henge. It's likely this was a Bronze Age barrow and that a barrow cemetery once existed on the site before being ploughed out over the years. Prior research had also found a rectilinear enclosure, remains of buildings and hearths, and Roman ceramic material. The latest excavations have been able to shed light on these. Numerous ceramic fragments dating to between the 7th and 9th centuries have been found by field walking and during the excavations, along with a few pieces of glass from the same time period. 2 bone combs were also found which date to between the 6th and 9th centuries. The glass comes from thin-walled drinking vessels that were only used in high-status ecclesiastical settings. This may indicate the presence of an early medieval ecclesiastical community at the site or early medieval burials furnished with grave goods. If there were early medieval burials at the site, then it's possible these were made by reusing Bronze Age barrows, something that there are plenty of examples of in other locations. However, since no evidence of Bronze Age barrows was found beyond the previous geophysical survey, which identified at least one to the west, and since much of the ceramics were found in plough soil rather than a stratified context, it's hard to determine what sort of activity was taking place there between the 7th and 9th centuries. The sheer quantity of the finds suggests, though, that intensive activity of some sort was taking place there. No further Roman finds were unearthed. After analysing the state of the tesserae flooring previously uncovered, the authors of the paper think it's likely this was brought from elsewhere and reused there during the medieval period. The southern and eastern sections of a rectilinear ditched enclosure that had been found on previous geophysical surveys were also identified in the excavations. They cut across the henge, but it's not clear when this enclosure was built or what its relationship with the prehistoric monument is. In the middle of this square enclosure, there are the outlines of a building divided into 3 cells with an additional unit to the southwest that had been seen on previous surveys, and more details of this building emerged during the latest excavations. It was likely a medieval hall dating to between the 12th and 13th centuries. Another building close by that had been identified in earlier work was also excavated more fully. The authors of the paper concluded that this structure was a chapel built in the 12th century dedicated to Saint Pega. The paper concludes by discussing how Crowland was used as a sacred landscape for a long time. It's likely the henge and barrows were still visible in the landscape during the early medieval period, and that these features, along with the watery landscape, made it particularly attractive as an hermetic location and a monastic foundation. The paper goes into a lot of detail on medieval history and hagiographies, so if you're interested in reading more about that, it's open access and referenced in the description below. That's it. Thank you for watching. If you want to make an offering to the algorithm deity, then please hit the like button. Thank you to my patrons and channel members, and I'll see you next time.